So Israel's about to drop the hammer on Hamas. They're saying this next offensive operation into Gaza is going to be so intense that any hostage negotiation efforts are going to completely fall apart. So it gives you an idea of what we have coming up. Now, this is according to some reporting today from Manny Fabian of the Times of Israel, and he's talking about a statement put out by the IDF in response to some pushback they've gotten, saying that they're kind of dragging their feet since offensive operations began back on March 18th, or resumed, I should say, on March 18th. This IDF statement says, quote, "They're continuing to ramp up pressure on Hamas to bring the terror group to agree to a hostage deal, but it is not yet moving ahead with a major offensive. Such a major offensive, which is intended to defeat Hamas on the battlefield, would likely cause the ceasefire hostage negotiations to completely collapse," according to the military. The IDF has set no deadline for when the major offensive would begin, and it would be decided upon by the political echelon. A goal of militarily defeating Hamas in the battlefield is significant. That's going to be a larger, more robust, more lethal operation than we've seen the IDF carry out in Gaza so far. So with that, I thought it was worth providing a bit of an update here as to where the situation stands today. Again, offensive operations resumed in Gaza on March 18th. The IDF put out kind of a long roll-up earlier today that we're going to run through. They say so far, as part of renewed operations, approximately 1,200 terror targets have been struck from the air by 350 fighter jets and aircraft of the Israeli Air Force. More than 100 targeted eliminations have been carried out, and hundreds of terrorists and military commanders from terror organizations in the Gaza Strip have been neutralized. To provide a little more detail there, they say key figures among those who have been eliminated is a deputy brigade commander, 5 battalion commanders, a deputy battalion commander, the head of military intelligence for Hamas in the southern Gaza Strip, 15 company commanders, and additional terrorists who infiltrated Israeli territory and took part in the October 7th attack. This is something that we've heard a lot of recently. Remember those videos of the hostage handovers that Hamas was filming, and it showed some of their senior leaders kind of coming out of hiding for the first time and, really since the attacks took place on October 7th. And it looks an awful lot at this point like Israel was tracking them, watched where they went, noted their location, and as soon as the ceasefire expired back on March 18th, immediately began eliminating some of those senior officials. Now, earlier today, the IDF put out a statement saying that they had eliminated the commander of Hamas's Shijaya battalion, Mohammed al-Ajla. My apologies in the pronunciation there. In a strike on Sunday night. They say he was the 5th commander of this battalion to be eliminated since the beginning of the war, and the 3rd since renewed operations in Gaza, as in like the 3rd in a month. So they're chewing through battalion commanders in Shijaya right now, which I'm pretty sure I'm mispronouncing as well. I had somebody correct me on that previously, but I can't for the life of me remember the different way to say it. Work in progress here when it comes to pronunciations. Israel says prior to the strike, numerous steps were taken to mitigate the risk of harming civilians, including issuing advance warning to civilians, precise munitions, and aerial surveillance. Now, turning to ground operations here, we did get some footage from the IDF saying they are continuing to expand the Marag corridor, which divides Khan Yunis and the Rafah brigades. And I'm going to pull up a map here, the second half of this video, to kind of show some of these locations within Gaza. They say as part of the operation, the IDF has achieved full operational control over several key areas and routes throughout the Gaza Strip. Approximately 30% of the Gaza Strip's territory is now designated as an operational security perimeter. You know what? No, let's go to a map. I feel like it's worth showing that now. So here we have live UA map, publicly available resource. I'll zoom in here. Got the Gaza Strip. What you're seeing in blue around here is kind of this operational corridor, what they're referring to as the operational security perimeter. And you can see that extends around the majority of the Gaza Strip. And there's a couple other key areas here. Right in the middle, the Nesdarim corridor. You can see Israel has expanded control over that. And then the real focus right now is down in the south. And we're going to talk more about this here in a minute. You're starting to see a serious expansion of Israeli control in the south, and it looks an awful lot like the plan here is to take over the entirety of Rafah and have control from the border with Egypt all the way up to essentially kind of the southwestern portion of Khan Yunis. But we'll come back to that map here in a moment. Turning up to northern Gaza, the IDF said that a few days ago they were able to identify and dismantle a 1.2-kilometer-long tunnel where they were able to identify a weapons storage facility near that route containing a stockpile of around 20 explosive devices, an anti-tank guided missiles, and others. In that operation, they identified some Hamas militants trying to set explosive charges near Israeli forces. They were identified, a strike carried out, eliminating that threat. Now, turning back to this reporting from Manny Fabian, they say the military expects that as long as the operation goes on and more territory is captured, troops will encounter more friction with Hamas operatives who are currently being pushed back and largely not engaging Israeli forces. And we've talked about this in recent videos. There's only been like one, maybe two incidents of direct fire engagements between Hamas and the IDF, which is shockingly low. And, there's a couple different ways to look at that. One is that all of Hamas has been eliminated. There's no indication that that's the case. You could also say that maybe Hamas isn't going to fight. There's also no indication that that's really in the cards. So where it kind of leaves us is the idea that they're not fighting the IDF on the perimeters. They're moving further and further into Gaza, probably into some areas that the IDF maybe didn't operate previously. They say a major focus in recent airstrikes has been Hamas government officials, including members of the terror group's Politburo and its police force, as well as destroying Hamas's already depleted weapon stocks. They say that Hamas has been attempting to rearm itself, and the IDF is taking this opportunity to remove as many weapons as possible before the start of this potential major offensive. Then turning back to the map here, while we talk through this territory that's been taken, Defense Minister Katz says that roughly 30% of the Gaza Strip is now under Israeli control, and that the IDF intends to hold this territory permanently. Now, there's probably a couple different ways to look at that. Does permanent mean until the hostages are back? Does permanent mean until Hamas is no longer in power? Or does permanent mean like permanent, forever? This is now part of Israel. I don't know. And indications right now are that there's no plans for Israel to leave the territory that they've now retaken inside of Gaza. They say after the military completes operations inside Rafah, the IDF's buffer zone in southern Gaza will stretch from the Egypt border to the outskirts of Han Yunis, more than 5 kilometers away, and include the entire city of Rafah within it. The buffer zone elsewhere on the border with Gaza has also been expanded from several hundred meters to around 2 kilometers in most areas. Troops are currently working to expand the buffer zone in Gaza City's eastern neighborhoods of Shajaya, Daraj, and Tufa. Kind of gives you an idea of where operations are going to be focused when and if this major offensive takes place. They say half of the Neztrim corridor just south of Gaza City is also being held by the IDF up to the Saladin Road. At any point, the IDF says it can recapture the western half of the corridor and bisect the strip again. I would imagine that that is probably going to be the precursor ahead of any major military operation. We're seeing that start to play out pretty slowly, all things considered. I mean, I guess the IDF has moved through these areas and taken it quickly, but it's been maybe quiet. Slow is not the right way to put it. Quietly is a better way to put it. Again, just because we're not seeing a lot of pushback from Hamas at this stage. And then going back to Israeli Defense Minister Katz, he said, quote, "The pressure on Hamas to carry out the deal is heavy and the tension between it and the local population is increasing." He added that Egypt, for the first time, has set as a condition for a comprehensive deal and for ending the war, the disarming of Hamas and the demilitarization of Gaza. This was reported on yesterday, where Egypt included in this ceasefire agreement to Hamas that they had to demilitarize. Now, it's great that Egypt put that in there. It's also been a hard line for Israel from the opening days of this war that Hamas will not remain in power and they have to be demilitarized entirely. They want to make sure they can't do anything like October 7th ever again, which is understandable from the Israeli perspective. Hamas pushed back on that and said this is unacceptable, and that they view their right to bear arms, their right to have a militant arm of Hamas as a right of the Palestinian people. So to Hamas, that whole point there about disarming and walking away is still completely off the table. We'll see if that ends up being a major sticking point as these negotiations continue. But the big point right now to kind of keep an eye on is when and if this major offensive ends up taking place. It sounds like Israel is pretty intent on setting the stage right now, increasing the buffer zones in a few different areas of the strip, and then when the time comes, if they're not able to get the hostages back through this negotiating process, we're probably going to see a pretty intense fight in some of the areas of Gaza that the IDF maybe hasn't quite been in so far. But that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.